Hey everyone, so Varka's initial beta kit was recently released today, so I just wanted to cover some of the details about how we think he works with his current info, give some of my first impressions and analysis on this kit, and just explain some of my thoughts about how he's going to play. As always, I want to emphasize that this is just like my day one impressions. I will have a more edited, thought out, and scripted video on his initial beta kit in the near future. This explanation will be unscripted and I'll just kind of give my thoughts on the way. So remember, this is very early information, very subject to change. With that, let's get right into it. So Varka is a 5-star animal claymore user. He ascends with crit damage. Some of the photos here show crit rate. That's wrong. It is crit damage, so to let you know. And Varka is a Hexarai character, meaning he gets bonuses if there are at least 2 Hexarai characters in the party. I'll kind of explain what this bonus is as we get into his main ability. His normal type you can completely ignore. His main kit is in his elemental skill. When used, he does damage and enters an enhanced state called Gale Rush mode. And during this state, he has enhanced normal attacks, so he is a normal attack based carry. And the interesting thing is that he wields 2 swords, with one of them dealing anemo damage, but the other one is going to be infused with either pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo depending on your team composition. So if we can see here, the talent level multipliers are actually level 1, so you don't have to worry about the actual numbers here. But as we can see, each of these hits has 30, like for example 30% plus 55.7%. so the first hit is going to be animal damage, but the second hit is going to deal either pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo damage depending on your party. So it's kind of a mix of he does anemo damage and he also does, let's see, pyro damage for instance. And pretty much all of his hits are going to be like this. It looks like a lot of his damage does come from normal attacks, but he does have some special abilities that also deal damage. After he enters his enhanced state, he not only has enhanced normals, but he also has access to this special elemental skill called 4 Winds Arise. And you can see that its cooldown is 11 seconds. And if we look at the extra info regarding 4 Winds Arise, it has 2 uses, but they're both initially on cooldown. So once he enters the skill, it has a 22-second cooldown. However, when he hits enemies with normal attacks, he will reduce this cooldown by 0.5 seconds, and he can trigger this cooldown reduction 15 times. So at a baseline, if the total cooldown for both skills are 22 seconds, he can reduce that by 7.5 seconds. But of course, that presents a problem because both of his special skill cooldowns total 22 seconds, but he can only subtract 7.5. That means there's still 14.5 seconds to go. And if we look back on how long his enhanced state actually lasts, it's 12 seconds. So something doesn't add up here, right? That's where the Hexarai bonus comes in. If there are at least 2 Hexarai characters in the party, instead of each of his normal attacks reducing the cooldown of his special skill by 0.5 seconds, it is reduced by 1 second. So if we take this into account, he can proc this 15 times, so that's minus 15 seconds. 22 minus 15 is 7, and that makes way more sense considering his total skill cooldown and his enhanced state duration. So Varka is a Hexarai character, and he will need at least 2 Hexarai characters in the party. And that's pretty much the gist of how Varka does damage. He's going to enter his enhanced state, just spam some normal attacks, and once his skill cooldown has been reduced enough, you can press it and then keep spamming normal attacks, and then you can press it again. And since it has 2 charges, you just use it 2 times. Now the interesting thing is that instead of using this special elemental skill after reducing its cooldown, you don't have to use it because Varka can consume the skill usage and instead perform a special charged attack called Azure Devour, and it doesn't consume stamina and it does elemental and anemo damage. So if we can see here, the 4 Winds Arise damage, it will do anemo damage and then pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo, right? And if we look at the Azure Devour damage, it's also the same thing, but at least in talent level 1, this multiplier is actually higher than the special elemental skills. So from a first glance, it's not actually spam normal attacks, press special skill, and then spam normal attacks and press special skill again. It's spam normal attacks, do a charged attack, and then spam normal attacks again before you can do another charged attack. So I'm not sure why you can press the elemental skill. Maybe it's a better AoE attack, and then the Azure Devour damage is more single target. Obviously, we need animations to know, or maybe the talent level 1 is somehow misleading, but either way, Varka's playstyle is still the same. You press a skill, you enter an enhanced state, and then you spam normal attacks until you get this cooldown reduced from his passive. Once that cooldown is fully reduced, you can either press a skill or do his charge attack to do an empowered attack, and then keep spamming normal attacks again before doing this enhanced attack a second time. And remember, all of these attacks deal anemo damage and either pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo damage depending on the team. So he's kind of a mixed elemental carry. There is also this hold skill that has a different cooldown. I'm 99% sure this is just exploration because it doesn't have any damage tied to it, so cool I guess. Now his infusion does have a priority order, however it doesn't really have a priority order when you take into account his talents, which heavily influence his team building. So first of all, when there is a pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo character in the party, Varka gains 10% anemo damage bonus and a corresponding elemental damage bonus for every 1000 attack, and then only one of these elemental types can grant this bonus at the same time, so you can't get like pyro, hydro, electro, and cryo damage bonus. You only get one of them, so you get anemo damage bonus and then let's just say pyro damage bonus depending on your team. And then the bonus of this effect cannot exceed 25%, so in order to max max it out, you need 2500 attack. But the important part of Varka's team building comes here. If you have at least 2 Animo characters in a party, or at least 2 of the same Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo in the party, then his normal attacks, charge attacks of Zur Devour, and 4 Winds Arise in Gale Rush mode, which is all of his damage from his elemental skill, deal 140% of their normal damage. But if you meet both of these requirements, his damage is increased by 220%. I think it's a safe assumption that this isn't just normal damage bonus, it's direct multiplier. That pretty much means a lot of his damage is tied to meeting this talent requirement. And in order to meet this talent requirement, he needs 2 Animo characters, and then the other 2 characters, they can't be a mix-up element. You can't have a Pyro and then an Electro unit because that doesn't meet both requirements. You only get 140% in that case. You need 2 of the same element in those final 2 team slots. So you're gonna have 2 Animo characters and then 2 Pyro characters maybe. You're gonna have 2 Hydro characters, 2 Electro characters, or 2 Cryo characters. Any of those elements work, but you need 2 of the same one. If you don't have 2 of the same one, you're only gonna get 140%, assuming you maintain 2 Animo characters. And 140% and 220% is a pretty big leap. If you don't meet these requirements, I think it's safe to assume that Varka's personal damage at least is going to significantly decrease. And then one more passive here is that if any of his party members trigger Swirl, then he gets 1 stack of this Azure Fang Oath, and then this increases the damage of pretty much everything in his elemental skill. Everything in his elemental skill, from his enhanced normal attacks, his special skills, and all that stuff. So this just buffs his damage when you have another character that's trigger Swirl. And you're gonna meet this requirement because you need 2 Animo characters. So that just further incentivizes 2 Animo characters. Lastly, there's this elemental burst. I didn't put too much emphasis in it because all it does is it does 2 hits of damage. The first one is Animo damage, and then the second hit will be Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cry, depending on your team. Now, the weird thing is that if you look at all the buffs he gets that I emphasize into his talents, Varka's burst is not buffed by his talents. Only his elemental skill is. So I'm pretty sure this is like a Nefer situation where in Nefer's case, she did Lunar Bloom damage and all of her talents buffed her elemental skills charge attacks, but it didn't buff her burst, so her burst didn't really do like a big nuke of damage. It was fine to use, but it's not a massive source of damage. And it's looking like Varka's burst is the exact same thing. So it's very likely if you can use it, but otherwise you just ignore it. He does also have a passive talent that decreases his elemental skill cooldown by 5% for every monster character in the party, but this is just an overworld thing. It doesn't work in endgame. I'm not gonna delve into constellations too much right now. I don't think it's that important, but the main things to point out is C4 gives him a team buff that's similar to Venti's Hexerai buff, and then the other abilities just enhance his special skill / special charge attack his normal attacks reduce his cooldown for. C1 gives him an extra instance of this, so instead of 2 he can do 3 and it does more damage. C2 also gives him more damage when he triggers this special skill or the special charge attack, and then C6 pretty much allows him to use even more of them. The weird thing is, from some very early calcs that I saw, a lot of his damage is looking to come from his normal attacks and not like this 4 Winds Arise damage or the Azure Devour damage, but all of his constellations buffs these special instances of damage. So I'm not sure how it's looking. I'm gonna wait for people to cook here. Now to quickly go over some builds, his signature weapon here, it gives a lot of crit rate, and then it gives attack speed, and then it gives the wielder damage percent after doing normal attacks, so up to 30% here. And then if you have the Hexerai team buff, so 2 Hexerai characters in the party, he also gets 30% crit damage. So tons of stats, perfect for him. The weird thing is the attack speed. He is a normal attacker, so it makes sense. However, he is also a Claymore, and Claymores notoriously have slow attack speed and also have a lot of hit lag, so attack speed doesn't really do anything for them. Personally, I am very pessimistic on attack speed buffs. I don't think they really do much. I'd rather have just pure damage buffs, and a lot of the attack speed buffers that we have aren't very good supports in general. But again, attack speed in general and Varka's normal attacks are going to be heavily dependent on animations, which we currently don't have yet. My assumption is that this attack speed is just going to feel better to play. I don't think it's going to massively change his normal attack combos or anything. In terms of other Claymore options, Varka is your standard attack scaling carry, so I just scanned through a lot of these weapons. Like for example, Wolf's Greystone gives attack, seems good on him. Beacon gives crit rate, and then elemental skill hits an opponent and then their attack will be increased. That sounds good too. Verdict gives crit rate and then attack percent. He doesn't really use this, but hey, it gives attack percent and crit rate. Sounds pretty good. Awika's signature, again, he doesn't have this Night Soul's Blessing state, but hey, he still uses elemental skill. He can get crit damage and attack and gives crit rate. It's probably going to be good. Serpent Spine usually is the quote-unquote best 4-star Claymore, but most of the time you probably won't get all these stacks. If you can and you somehow have a shield on your team, then I guess it could be good, but Talking Stick, which is the other Battle Pass Claymore, also looks interesting because it gives crit rate, and then it says attack percent will be increased by 32% for 15 seconds after being affected by Pyro. So I'm thinking you just use Bennett and then you get this attack percent. I think the baseline free-to-play option will be Tidal Shadow, which is the Fontaine craftable. It needs healing to get the attack percent, but as we get into potential teams, he'll probably have a healer on his team. In terms of artifact sets, with the release of Columbina, there is a new Hexerai related set. 2-piece gives 18% attack percent, and then he will activate 25% 50% attack because he does normal attack, charge attack, elemental skill, elemental burst. And since he is a Hexerei character, then he'll also get 20% crit rate. So this is definitely going to be his best in slot set for damage. If you want to be extremely pessimistic about his own personal damage, then I guess you can put him on 4-piece VV, but I think people who actually want to play Varka will want him to do damage. I think this is kind of a meme. Oh, he's gonna support some other wheelchair or whatever. You're gonna want the new Hexerei set. Now let's go over some of my thoughts on what his potential teams may be. So remember, because of his talent, you want 2 Anemo characters on the team, and then you either choose 2 Electro, 2 Hydro, 2 Pyro, or 2 Cryo. So let's talk about the Anemo options. The best Anemo option will be Venti. He is a Hexerei character, and with the Hexerei buff, he will give 15% damage bonus to Anemo and 50% damage bonus to whatever he swirls to Varka. Since you're going to maintain one element, you're basically giving 50% damage bonus to Varka to all of his damage, even if he does 2 different elements of damage. And he also has grouping, so Venti is probably going to be his best Anemo support. Other than that, C6 Farazan could be an option. It really depends on how much Anemo damage he really does, because Farazan mainly buffs Anemo damage, but Varka obviously doesn't just deal Anemo damage, he does another element. Currently, I think it's up in the air how much Anemo damage Varka really does. Definitely have to wait for animations and theory crafters to figure that out, so I'll just put her as an option. Aoife is actually interesting because he's a catalyst user, so he can hold TTDS, but the main important factor here is he is a nod-line character, and he can actually proc 4-piece scroll as an Anemo character. Meaning, if he procs Swirl, he will give the damage bonus for the element he swirls and Anemo damage, which he can uniquely do. Chaska can also do this for Scroll, but Aoife can hold TTDS. Sucrose is also technically an option because she's a Hexerei character, however, her main attribute is giving EM, which is useful for triggering reactions, but in Varka teams, you're not really triggering reactions, you're just triggering Anemo swirls for a single element, but most of his damage isn't going to be coming from this reaction, it's just going to be raw damage. So in that sense, Kazuo could be useful as well because he gives damage bonus with his passive here after triggering Swirl. I don't think he's going to be the best option, but it might be an option. And then the other 2 options that I'm thinking of are Jean and Shenyun just as Anemo healers, which can be useful if you need a healer for mainly Farina here. So those are the current Anemo options that I'm thinking of. Just keep in mind that if you don't use Venti or Sucrose, then your other options have to have another Hexerei character because you need 2 Hexerei characters on the team. If you use Venti or Sucrose, that already fulfills that option, so you can kind of use anyone else in the other slots. Now speaking of the other slots, let's start with Pyro because Pyro is going to be the best overall option, mainly because Durin exists. Durin is a Hexerei character, so he's going to get buffed from that, and then he just gives Res Shred off your damage. He's going to be very strong. Paired with Durin, his best option is going to be Bennett. He's a healer, and he gives a large attack buff. So the expected best team is probably going to be Varka, Venti, Durin, and then Bennett. Durin is especially useful because you're not using Venti or Sucrose, then he fulfills the Hexerei character, so it doesn't really matter. But if you don't have Durin and you don't have Venti, then you have to come up with something else, right? Now, other than that, there's not really too many other good Pyro units to use. I guess you can use Shangling, but Shangling in Mono Pyro, no reaction. It's like kind of cope. And then I guess you could use Mawika solo Notline character, but again, that also kind of feels bad because you kind of want another Notline character to actually feel her burst. If you're going to go the Pyro route, it's probably going to be because of Durin's existence. Now, Pyro is the expected best in slot team option for him just because of Durin and Bennett. However, I think the most competitive option will be choosing 2 Hydro units because there are a ton of good Hydro supports. He is a normal attacker, so you can just use Xingqiu, Yelan, even Dahlia, who gives attack speed, which is probably going to be fine. You can also use Farina, but of course you need a healer, so you can pair with another healer like Seedreen and Kokomi, or like I said, you can use Jean or Shenyun to fulfill as the healer for Farina. Now, I think the most interesting unit here is actually Mona. Mona is a Hexerei character, so she's going to get the Hexerei buffs, and through extending her Omen duration, she could potentially be a very strong buffer for Varka. So I think if you're able to use, like, for example, Farina, Mona, and then an Anemo healer, you've gotten the Hexerei character buff because Mona and Varka, and you don't need to use Durin or Venti if you haven't pulled for them. So I think Mona and Farina duo might be a very competitive option. Next, let's go over Electro. Now, the unfortunate thing about Electro is a lot of these characters actually require reactions to be triggered to fulfill their full potential. Like, for example, Anefa, you're not getting Electro Charge because you need to run 2 Electro, so she's not going to be as good. Now, the most obvious choice seems to be Fischl because she's also a Hexerei character. However, her Hexerei buff only gives attack or EM if you trigger Electro Charge or Lunar Charge or Overload, and you're not really doing that with Varka. So she's not actually as strong of an option as she usually is. So I think just some generic off-fielders like Fischl can still be fine. You can even use Yaimiko, maybe even Kuki if you really want the healing. Auroran can, I guess, give 4-piece scroll, which is okay. And then Eonsun and Sarah because they're attack buffers. Depending on how much he moves, Eonsun will probably be really good with him. But the dual Electro characters don't seem that strong compared to double Pyro and double Hydro. Lastly, we have Cryo. I'm gonna be perfectly honest, the Cryo options don't look very good. Technically, you can use like Shenhe and Rosari as 2 sub DPSs, Chongyun and maybe Mika for attack speed or something, but I don't like any of these Cryo options. I don't think they're gonna be very good with Varka. So I think those are all my current first impressions and first thoughts on Varka's kit and team building and all that stuff. In terms of his team building, I think a lot of people think of him as versatile, but personally, if I consider like his best team options, I really don't think he's as versatile as you may think. Theoretically, you need 2 animal units, and then you can choose any 2 cryo, electro, hydro, or pyro unit, right? So it sounds versatile, but then if you look at the actual options you have, like 2 cryo doesn't look very good, so like cryo is off the menu. 2 electro is okay, but I'm not expecting it to be amazing. So all we have are like 2 hydro and 2 power units, and then the pyro units you're probably just going to use Durin and Bennett as the best slot because everyone else is kind of subpar. And then 2 hydro definitely has more flexibility because you can use Yelan, Xingqiu, you can use Farina with a healer, and then you can even use Mona, right? There's definitely more flexibility in the hydro slot. But like when you consider like really good teams with Varka, I don't think he's as flexible as it may seem. However, I can definitely see in content like Imaginarium Theater, he's definitely very flexible. Like he's not locked into, oh, I need to play Lunar Charge for Flins, I need to play Lunar Bloom for Nefer, I need to play Lunar Crystallize for Zibai. If you have Varka and then just 2 elements of either Cryo, Electro, Hydro, and Pyro and just put them together, he'll work fine. In terms of kit, he is very straightforward and simple. It seems like that's the design choice for nod-krai DPSs because again, Varka feels very similar to Flins and Zibai because they just enter an enhanced state, spam normal attacks, and then press a special button. It's kind of the same thing. However, definitely the unique thing about Varka is that his normal attacks actually deal damage, and that really reminds me of Skirk because Skirk is also a normal attack carry, and Skirk normal attack combos have complexity and optimization. So this could definitely be the case where you might have some dash cancels, some walk cancels, some jump, maybe even some jump cancels, just to optimize the amount of normal attacks you can get. And with his signature giving attack speed, that could be a whole nother discussion. However, all those normal attack combos and stuff really depends on animations. And remember, as I'm recording this video, we do not know any animations or how he attacks yet. And I guess that's the last thing I want to emphasize is that because we do not know how his attacks look or really work at all, it's very hard to judge how good of a DPS he is at the current moment. I've definitely seen some early impressions in calcs, and to be perfectly honest, they don't seem that great. But again, we don't know the animations. There are a lot of assumptions out there on how many normal attacks he's getting. It could very well be an underestimation. We could be missing something, or if someone says he does a lot of damage, maybe they're overestimating. So we really just have to wait and see how he ends up throughout the beta. Let theory crafters cook. Personally, I'm expecting Varka's best team to not be as strong, quote unquote, as like Flynn's, Nefer, and Zibai with their best teams with Columbina. I think Varka's best team is going to calc a little bit lower than them, and that's mainly because I'm expecting Nicole's release to buff him, and I think that HOYOverse will account for this, so make him a little bit weaker, and then when Nicole releases, she might take Bennett's slot and buff Varka even further. But of course, that's my speculation. Not sure if that's actually true. We'll just have to wait and see. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to cover about Varka for now. So yeah, hope this helped or was interesting, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.